Maybe this is a question for the Minister. Given this context, and it's not the first time we've seen a school that's receiving significant amounts of public money not meeting its obligations, will the government consider further action to ensure better reporting and accountability for private schools that are receiving public funds?
Thanks, Senator Allman-Payne. And just in regards to this issue, I know that Minister Clare has been aware and has been working closely with the department on it and is concerned about the impact on students and families and staff as well.
Yeah.
In terms of the broader issue that you've talked about, I know that it's something that you've been raising here at Estimates for a while. I know the department have been diligently answering those questions. I know that we want to ensure that the money that is spent from a federal point of view, the Minister line, I think, has been consistently that it glows in the dark, and we actually see that it is having the impact that we need it to be. I know that that's what he's been desiring to deliver as part of the agreement with states and territories that we're signing up around the country. So that is the expectation of the Minister when it comes to the use of money in education.
Mm-hmm. We had a conversation at last Estimates about bullying in schools and putting in place reporting mechanisms. And if I think back to when we were talking about Cranbrook, you know, the biggest issue was that the document they had outstanding was in fact their current bullying and harassment policy. I'm continuing to hear from private school parents about bullying, about a lack of transparency and also the difficulty of withdrawing their kids when they're getting slugged with fees, even though they need to withdraw on that basis. Has the department, since we last spoke, given any consideration to what policies should be in place at private schools to ensure that parents and kids facing these circumstances are not penalised with fees or unduly shut out of decision-making?
Senator, thank you for the question. And certainly bullying and cyberbullying, you know, they have significant impacts not only on students but their families and the rest of the school community. And, I mean, we're seeing that across the country. So, Minister, you would have seen that Minister Clare and the PM have announced a review into bullying. Minister Clare has written to his colleagues around that review, and part of what that review will look at, it will look at what are the policies, practices and systems in schools, and that's independent schools, it's Catholic schools and it's public schools, and they will provide advice to education ministers about what could a national standard look like. At an individual school level, if families do run into concerns and are having issues, we would expect schools to work with those families to bring resolution to not only the issue, but particularly if the parents were looking at moving their child to a different school, we would expect that the school would work that through in a constructive way with the families.
I appreciate that you would expect that. I guess, again, the Australian government is handing over extraordinary amounts of money to private institutions. They are the majority funder of those institutions. I think it's fair to say that the accountability and standards that public schools are held to are much higher when it comes to bullying, harassment, and their levels of accountability. And you know, it's rightly so, they're receiving public funds. The concern isn't the level of accountability they have, it's the lack of accountability that many schools in the private sector seem to have, and yet they're receiving public money. So I guess it's a question for the Minister. Is the government of the view that if you're receiving public money, you should be held to the same stringent standards that the public sector is expected to meet in order to protect staff and students?
Well, they obviously operate under a different operating environment in terms of their... I think the Deputy Secretary has talked through what their responsibilities are. This is a really important issue, I accept that, and I know the genuineness with which you bring the concern, and I think it's reflected with the approach of the government in terms of Minister Clare announcing the review that will be undertaken. So I expect that if there's recommendations that come out of that go to the point that you're making, I'm sure that Minister Clare would be open to those. But it isn't something that is before us at the moment, I suppose, Senator Allman-Payne.
Just when you say it's a different operating environment, do you mean that means that standards can be lower?
No, I wouldn't say that standards can be lower, but obviously the states have responsibilities in terms of how those schools are administered.
Okay. So notwithstanding that the feds are by far the majority funder, you're still happy for the states to have the responsibility as to whether they're being accountable?
Senator, if I can respond to that. So all non-government schools operate with a dual regulatory model. So
yes.
There's the role of the Australian government
yes.
by way of is that entity a fit and proper entity? Are they financially viable? Are they not-for-profit? The state is the one that registers them, that
yes.
entity, to provide schooling. And that state
yes.
registration process goes through the standards for curriculum, the standards for safety, the standards for operations of the school. So for any entity to receive Australian government funding, they have to be registered in the jurisdiction. So we have those two regulatory regimes work in tandem,
yes.
but it's the jurisdiction registration.
Yes. I understand that.
Process.
I guess my question goes to, as a matter of policy, does the federal government think, I understand how it operates now, the question is, given that you are handing over such significant sums, and as Senator O'Sullivan has alluded to in his question, it's an increasing amount because the more that we see people moving to private schools, because that's where the resourcing is, the more the feds are going to be on the hook to fund them. So should there not be an increased level of accountability given the number of students that we're seeing in private schools and the fact that, you know, the level of protection, as we've seen, is not necessarily up to scratch?
Yeah, thanks, Senator Allman-Payne. And I suppose I'd reiterate the answer to the first question around what Minister Clare has done in terms of driving the reforms and what we hope to see. I understand you're going more specifically to the issue of bullying. All I can point to is that the Minister has announced that review. I'm sure if they came back with recommendations that go to the concerns that you raised, that he would be open to those.
All right. Just one last question, Chair, I think, and then I'll let you move on. I'll come back. Over the past 20 years, private school fees have risen at over double the rate of inflation. And in 2025, we've seen even more rises. According to EdStart, fees are up around 6% this year nationally, including 5.6% in the regions. The average private school fee for Year 12 is now about $21,000 in Victoria. It's $16,000 in New South Wales. And the highest fee private schools are now charging over $50,000 a year. The Australian government continues to give $51 million per day to private schools. Minister, do you think that taxpayers or indeed parents of private school kids are getting a fair deal?
Well, obviously that's up for individual parents to assist and caregivers in terms of where they want to send their children to school. We obviously want to ensure that all schools are adequately funded and that they do, no matter what people choose, they do get the best possible education that they can. I understand that some parents may want to choose to send their children to private school. That is absolutely their right, and it's important that government respect that and fund those schools appropriately. But I'd reiterate the concern, and what the Minister has been focused on is ensuring that all schools are funded adequately and that we get the best possible educational outcomes as a result of that.
Does the government have concerns at the level of fee rises in private schools, that they're massively outstripping inflation? I mean, you're saying parents have choice. The question we're asking is the parents who are making those choices, is it right that private schools are increasing fees at the rate that they are?
Well, it'd obviously be up to those individual schools to justify those to the parents and those people who are paying the fees to send their children or their people they've got caregiving responsibilities to. So that it would be a matter for those people to resolve that and make the best decision for them and their family.
I note that one of the reasons that the government, John Howard, introduced the Choice and Affordability Fund was to put downward pressure on private schools' fees. Do you think that's worked?
Well, it's well before my time, Senator Allman-Payne, but all I can do is reiterate what the purpose of Minister Clare and the reforms that he's driving is to ensure that all schools are adequately resourced and that we're achieving the best possible results because of that.
Thank you. I'll leave it there for that block, Chair. Thanks.
Senator Pocock.